IEA ने IL 2023-2028 तक विश्लेषण और पूर्वानुमान मध्यम अवधि की बाजार रिपोर्ट लॉन्च की। 17 जुलाई 2023 को कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्लब ऑफ इंडिया, रफी मार्ग, नई दिल्ली में। अस्सलामु अलैकुम, मैं ज़मीर अहमद अंसारी और आप देख रहे हैं जेड न्यूज़ फॉर यू। अर्ज़ यह है कि आपने अपने चैनल जेड न्यूज़ फॉर यू को अभी तक सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है तो सब्सक्राइब करें और साथ में दिए हुए बेल आइकन को भी दबाएं, जिससे हमारी आने वाली सभी वीडियोस के नोटिफिकेशन सबसे पहले आपको मिल सकें। अंतर्राष्ट्रीय ऊर्जा एजेंसी IEA ने MoP&NG के तत्वाधान में पेट्रोलियम योजना और विश्लेषण सेल PPAC के सहयोग से तेल 2023 मध्यम अवधि की बाजार रिपोर्ट लॉन्च की, जिसका शीर्षक है IEA तेल 2023 से 2028 तक आपूर्ति और मांग की गतिशीलता। आज दिल्ली में एक कार्यक्रम जिसमें भारतीय तेल और गैस उद्योग के दिग्गजों ने भाग लिया। लॉन्च कार्यक्रम में बोलते हुए MoP&NG के सचिव श्री पंकज जैन ने अपने मुख्य भाषण में कहा, भारत की ऊर्जा की मांग किसी भी अन्य प्रमुख अर्थव्यवस्था की तुलना में तेजी से बढ़ रही है और यही प्रवृत्ति जारी रहने की उम्मीद है। वित्तीय वर्ष 2022 से 2023 में पेट्रोलियम उत्पादों की खपत के बारे में बात करते हुए पेट्रोलियम सचिव ने कहा, पिछले साल पेट्रोलियम उत्पादों की कुल खपत 223 एमएमटी थी, जो पिछले वर्ष की तुलना में लगभग 12% की वृद्धि थी। पेट्रोलियम उत्पादों में ये वृद्धि एचएसड में 12.1% की वृद्धि से प्रेरित है, जो 85.9 एमएमटी के साथ सबसे बड़ा योगदान करता है और 2022 से 2023 के दौरान 34.9 एमएमटी खपत के साथ एमएस पिछले वर्ष की तुलना में 13.4% की वृद्धि दर पर है। आगे बोलते हुए कहा, श्री जैन ने कहा, दोनों मामलों में मात्रा न केवल पूर्व कोविड खपत को एक अंतर से पार कर गई, बल्कि आज के इतिहास में सबसे अधिक खपत भी है। चालू वर्ष में भी विकास की गति जारी है। पेट्रोलियम सचिव ने यह भी उल्लेख किया कि भारतीय दुनिया का चौथा सबसे बड़ा रिफाइनर, चौथी सबसे बड़ी LNG टर्मिनल क्षमता, चौथा सबसे बड़ा ऑटो बाजार और तीसरा सबसे बड़ा जैव ईंधन उत्पादक है। उन्होंने कहा, भारत का ध्यान डिकार्बोनाइजेशन पर है। इनसे पहले ही पेट्रोल में 12% इथेनॉल मिश्रण हासिल कर लिया है और 2025 तक 20% मिश्रण का लक्ष्य रखा है। IEA की लॉन्च रिपोर्ट में पाया गया है कि वैश्विक तेल मांग की वृद्धि धीमी होने वाली है, जो 2028 तक लगभग रुक जाएगी। ये ऊर्जा सुरक्षा चिंताओं के लिए स्वच्छ ऊर्जा प्रौद्योगिकी और तेजी से बदलाव के कारण पेट्रोकेमिकल और विमानन से मजबूत मांग के बावजूद वार्षिक मांग वृद्धि 2023 से 2.4 MB दिन से घटकर 2028 में केवल 0.4 MB दिन होने की उम्मीद है, जिससे मांग में चरम वृद्धि देखी जा सकती है। विशेष रूप से परिवहन के लिए तेल का उपयोग बढ़ रहा है। 2026 के बाद गिरावट तय है, क्योंकि इलेक्ट्रिक वाहनों के विस्तार, जैव ईंधन की वृद्धि और ईंधन अर्थव्यवस्था में सुधार से खपत कम हो गई है। हालांकि कुछ अर्थव्यवस्थाएं, विशेष रूप से चीन और भारत, पूर्वानुमान के दौरान ऊर्जा वृद्धि दर्ज करना जारी रखेंगी। तेल पर भारत के विकास पूर्वानुमान पर टिप्पणी करते हुए IEA में तेल उद्योग और बाजार प्रमुख टोरिल बोसिन ने कहा, 2022 से 2028 की लगभग 3/4 वृद्धि एशिया में आएगी, जिसमें भारत विकास के मुख्य स्रोत के रूप में चीन को पीछे छोड़ देगा। 2027 तक जैव ईंधन जैसे वैकल्पिक स्वच्छ ईंधन में 2028 तक नए तरल ईंधन आपूर्ति वृद्धि का 10% प्रदान करने की उम्मीद है। रिपोर्ट के अनुसार 2022 से 2028 तक जैव ईंधन लगभग 600 kb प्रति D तक बढ़ जाएगा, जिसमें ब्राजील, इंडोनेशिया और भारत का संयुक्त योगदान 70% है। ये वृद्धि है। IEA रिपोर्ट ने आंकलन किया कि तेल और गैस की खोज, निष्कर्षण और उत्पादन में वैश्विक अपस्ट्रीम निवेश 2015 के बाद से अपने उच्चतम स्तर तक पहुंचने की ओर है, जो साल दर साल 11% बढ़कर 2023 में 528 बिलियन अमेरिकी डॉलर हो जाएगा। ओपेक प्लस गठबंधन के बाहर तेल उत्पादक देश संयुक्त राज्य अमेरिका, ब्राजील और गुयाना के नेतृत्व में 2028 तक 5.1 MB प्रतिदिन की अपेक्षा वृद्धि के साथ मध्यम अवधि में वैश्विक आपूर्ति क्षमता बढ़ाने की योजना पर हावी है। सऊदी अरब, संयुक्त अरब अमीरात और इराक ओपेक के भीतर क्षमता निर्माण की योजना का नेतृत्व करते हैं। IEA ने महसूस किया कि यदि निवेश का ये स्तर कायम रहता है तो रिपोर्ट में शामिल अवधि में पूर्वानुमान मांग को पूरा करने के लिए पर्याप्त होगा। हालांकि यह उस मात्रा से अधिक है जिसकी विश्व में आवश्यकता होगी।
Khanuja sir, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Petroleum. Then I'd like to invite, we'd like to invite Toril Bosni, who is the Global Head of Oil and Markets at the IEA in Paris. Now that we have this August gathering here amongst us, and it's a day that, we're actually bringing forward the oil report, or as they say, the oil 2023, which is the outlook by the IEA, which is in the midterm to 2028. And this is the first ever India launch, which they are doing this time. And that makes it more special. And I think the audience, or in fact our esteemed guests that we have here, kind of corroborate that. So a very good evening and welcome. I'm Avantika Gaitayal, Assistant Director, Demand and Economic Studies at Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell under the Ministry of Petroleum. Just a quick break. We have Chairman Indian Oil, Shrikant Madhav Reddy sir. So very welcome to you, please. Now that we have our stage full and it looks all complete, the event is set to go. So just a quick introduction to the event. Before that I give an introduction, I'd actually request our DG PPAC, P. Manoj Kumar sir, to do a green welcome of our esteemed guest. So I'd like to invite Secretary Petroleum, sir, a very warm welcome to you. Next, Additional Secretary sir, Praveen Khanuja sir, so very warm welcome to you. Shrikant Madhav Reddy sir, Chairman Indian Oil, so thank you sir for coming. And Toril Bosni, who is the Global Head Oil and Markets at the IEA. Thank you sir. The global energy crisis has moved energy security to the forefront of the international policy agenda and boosted the momentum behind the deployment of clean energy technologies. The energy transition plans announced by the Indian oil and gas industry give us further impetus to understand this trajectory. We at PPAC, that is Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell, an attached office of the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas Government of India, is very grateful to welcome all of you amongst us today evening. And we are also glad to partner here with Ministry of Petroleum, Indian Oil, Federation of Indian Petroleum Industry. I mentioned this event becomes all the more special because it's the first ever time that the International Energy Agency headquartered at Paris is actually launching the report that we see here. It's called the Oil 2023. It's an annual report of the IEA, but has never been launched in person in India. And that is how we have Ms. Toril Bosni, who's heading the entire division of their oil and markets. And she's especially here just for a day from Paris to actually talk about the report and how the IEA is forecasting the global supply and demand projections to 2028, which is the medium-term projections. And that becomes extremely important in a time when we see global turmoil and also a lot of dynamic developments in the Indian scenario. So not taking too much time, because I know that all of us are extremely eager to hear our esteemed, guests here, and also followed by the panel discussion. So if I may just quickly take you down through the agenda that we have today. We will have the opening remarks by Secretary Sir. and followed by which Ms. Doral Bossani will present the key findings from their flagship Oil 2023 report, which, she'll also talk of the India context. And that will be followed by the question answer session from our esteemed, invitees here. And please feel free to put forward your questions to Ms. Bossani. And following which, we have an esteemed panel discussion today, which will be tackling the twin energy and climate crisis, India's opportunity to lead. And we have, leaders here who are actually going to, come forward with the roadmap for India's, plan ahead. And in the panel, which of course I will introduce once the panel is coming on stage, we will again have an audience Q&A. So now, I would, without any further ado, I request Mr. P. Manoj Kumar, our Director General of Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell, Ministry of Petroleum, to please come forward and give the welcome address. Thank you.
Good evening. On the day respected Secretary Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas, Sri Pankaj Jain sir, Additional Secretary MoP&NG, Sri Praveen Kanwal sir, Chairman IOC, Sri S.M. Vaidyaji, Head Oil Industry Market Division IEA, Ms. Doral Bossani, our distinguished guests who are present here, especially invitees, colleagues and friends. It's a great honor for me welcoming our dignitaries and all our distinguished guests for the special India launch of IEA's Oil 2023 Outlook for Oil and Supply Demand, jointly organized by PPAC and MoP&NG. As we know, over the years, PPAC has created a data infrastructure in the oil and gas sector, and it is always a continuous endeavor for PPAC to improve the quality of data as well as the data coverage and the quality research. So in this line, recently we have signed an agreement with IEA through a statement of intent to jointly work with IEA in many fields in common areas like research, modeling and data gaps, etc. So today's program is organized by PPAC and IEA in this direction. As we know that this IEA publishes this report annually, but this is for the first time IEA is launching a country report which is happening in India today. And the report provides a comprehensive overview of evolving oil and supply and demand dynamics up to 2028. The report also explored the future challenges in the light of changing scenario and dynamics in the sector. And the report also highlights the global oil market scenario after the two turbulent years like COVID-19 and Russia-Ukraine war. I hope today's deliberation and discussion will enlighten us for to better understanding the global scenario in the future. So let me once again welcome all the invitees or special guests today for this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. You just set the tone. So like we mentioned that, we had a statement of intent that we signed at Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell during the India Energy Week with the International Energy Agency. And the idea is that through this partnership, if we can further, further the interests of India and especially at the global stage, that is going to be really, really helpful. Next on, and most awaited, we'd like to invite Secretary Sir Pankaj Jain sir, please, for the opening remarks. Thank you.
DGPPSC, Manoj Kumar, Ms. Bossani, Chairman Indian Oil, and I think there's a whole galaxy of people from the entire oil and gas industry. It would be pointless to try and list out all of them, but just to say, I think it's rather interesting if you see the sheer nature of the response that we have, the overwhelming response that we have. It's testimony to how much interest there is in something, in what the IEA is putting out, and I'm glad that you are here to actually take us through some of those ideas, because I think all of us here typically do watch with keen interest numbers which come out both from OPEC as well as from the IEA, as well as I think there's a whole cottage industry of analysts who keep writing about what numbers will look like 2 months later, 6 months later, with summer and so on. And I think somewhere within all this noise, some clarity is needed. We keep looking for, cues, and trying to understand fully as to. Yes, and we keep trying to look for ways and means to, in a sense, decipher signals which are often conflicting, signals which are often contradictory, and let's when we look at it from the India perspective again, we all realize, I think this is something which IEA has been saying all along, which others have been talking about. Our demand has been increasing, in fact it's been galloping in terms of what we look at petrol, we look at diesel, we look at ATF, all that is increasing very rapidly, and our refineries are running flat out, they're pretty much at 105% nameplate capacity. Yet all this is happening in spite of things like 10% ethanol blending, EVs and two-wheelers, almost a quarter of incremental sales in two-wheelers. Two-wheelers, in fact, 60 to 70% of our petrol consumption is two-wheelers. You have a very rapid uptake of EVs there. Yet, what is it that explains the huge demand surge? You look at historic data, historically, I think captains of industry are here, they'll hear me out. We were used to something like 3.5% incremental demand increase in diesel. What explains the kind of 7% or 10% demand increase that we have seen? Petrol also is a similar story. What the baseline number of 6 to 7% increase showing me a 12-13% increase last year, continuing into this year. Clearly, there is something which I think we are missing out into why this is happening. Is it that people are taking more trips? We have seen some evidence coming from vehicle sales which have increased again very, very dramatically. I think any category of vehicles, almost any category of vehicles that you look at, they're at all-time high sales. Something is happening here, both in terms of economic growth as well as consumer behavior. So what does it mean for us at the back end? For those of us who have to make sure that when a customer comes into a pump, he or she is going to get petrol or diesel the way he or she has always been used to. There is a challenge there. And also the fact that the rest of the world seems to be looking much more at us because of our refining capabilities. So today we export ATF, I think if I recall right, to 55 countries. We export diesel to over 30 countries. In all this, there is, are we going to emerge more and more as an entry port for crude being coming in, getting processed here, going out as finished products? So our whole understanding of this sector, our whole visioning for this sector, and the way we plan for, you will probably talk to us for the next 5 years, what's going to look like. We need to make investment decisions which are going to last for 30 years. So in a sense, the challenge for people in this room really is to take bets based on what you're telling us, and that therefore your analysis is not only topical; it's actually keenly awaited in terms of what is it that when you read the TVs, what do you tell us? So we are very, very closely looking forward to what you can tell us, conscious of the fact that energy transition is something which we are investing in, our companies are investing in, apart from the fact that each of them has announced their net zero plans somewhere around 2035 to 2040, broadly in that range. Government of India itself has put in almost $3.5 billion of investment from its own side, apart from what the companies themselves will make. So energy transition is going to keep happening, but it's not going to be a fall of a cliff for conventional fossil fuels. In India, the runway is going to be very long. And in that long runway, at what stage are we going to say that yes, come 2045, come 2055, that is the time when we should be looking at peak oil demand from India. So these are actually very, very exciting times to be sitting here and talking about these things, because there are many, many imponderables. There are many moving parts here, and we keenly want to look forward, and are looking forward, in fact, to somebody who can help make sense of this. So thank you very much for coming here, and want to pick up some of the things that you would like to share. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir, for those illuminating remarks. I think you've really set the context, and more than that, a perspective from what the government of India is looking at this issue. And I think all of us, energy is an area which is always so exciting, and especially, future is something which is always uncertain, but all of us try and attach some logic to it and want to know how it's going to look like, especially in the domain of energy, because it requires that sense of planning. Again, for that, I feel that, we have Mr. Bosini for, who's going to give us that insight of how the future is going to look like from the International Energy Agency's perspective. And the IEA has the OECD members. However, India is an associate member of the IEA. And hopefully, maybe going forward, as the IEA says, that India may be a full-time member. So, ma'am, I'll welcome you here to give your key insights and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you for coming, for the great organization. I'm very, very pleased, honored to be here today. My first time in India. IEA's first time launching our report in India. It's actually the first time, this is the first official launch of our report. So India is clearly on top of the priority list for IEA. Our engagement with India, our cooperation is growing ever stronger as part of G20 work with our leaders, and we really do appreciate all the work. India is a global player, we heard, not just in terms of oil demand, in refining, but in all parts of the energy sectors. So it's clearly a big part of the puzzle with a lot of moving pieces, as we heard. So our report that came out just a few weeks ago, what we're seeing is that the global energy crisis really has accelerated the transition away from oil. It's not happening at the same speed in all countries or for all fuels, but for the first time we're seeing that not just for climate reasons, but also for energy security, for high energy prices, we're seeing a rapid scaling up of investment into clean energy technologies, electric vehicles, efficiency measures. And that is really having an impact on oil demand growth that we're seeing. So in our projections to 2028, it's a 5-year outlook beyond the current one. What we're seeing is that oil demand growth this year going from more than 2 million barrels a day, very strong, as we're also recovering. We're still recovering from the pandemic, and especially strong growth in China. The pace of growth will slow gradually over the period, so that when we come to 2028, we see, based on the current policies and trajectories that we see, we're expecting growth of less than 500,000 barrels a day. So we're starting to see a peak in oil demand on the horizon. We're still seeing in this period continued increase in petrochemical demand, feedstocks, air travel, means that oil demand will continue to grow each year over the period. So we are seeing in our projections about 6 million barrels a day of growth from now to 2028, when oil demand reaches about 106 million barrels a day. What we are seeing, though, is that demand from oil from combustible fossil fuels, so excluding the biofuels that are taking up an ever larger shares. India is a prime example of countries that have put very ambitious policies in place to increase the share of biofuels and transportation fuels, but we're also seeing this in parts of Latin America and the United States, drivers of biofuels penetration, and in Europe. And we're also seeing a lot of the growth in petrochemical demand, the growing. So for combustible fuels, we're seeing the peak in the 2028 year, the last year, with transport demand peaking already in 2026 on a global basis. So, as I said, petrochemicals the key driver of oil demand growth in the period, providing more than half of the growth to 2028, more than 3 million barrels a day. A lot of this is coming from China, where a number of new facilities are ramping up at the moment. We're seeing them coming in already this year, last year, this year, and new plants coming on in the next few years. We're also seeing strong growth from the aviation sector, jet fuel demand growing by about 1 million barrels a day in 2023. Still strong growth next year as we see the remainder of the recovery with Chinese consumers taking to the skies again, but then it gradually slows over the period. What we see for the major road transport fuels, we see much lower roads, efficiency gains, EV sales. Gasoline will be the most impacted from this, we see. And gasoline will continue to grow in the period, especially driven by growth in lower income countries. So in terms of looking at where the oil demand is coming from, no surprise that Asia accounts for the majority of the increase from now to 2028. Actually, out of the 5.9 million total, 5.4 is coming from Asia, and China the largest contributors. As I said, China is the massive build-up in petrochemical capacity and rebound from the lockdown that is driving growth. But even in China, we're seeing an EV penetration, very rapid sales in EV sales in China will slow demand growth over the forecast period. And it's India that becomes the largest single source of growth in the 2028, the end of the forecast period, as the dynamic, very robust economic growth outlook, growing population, and still a strong transport fuel sector that sees India taking over as the main driver of oil demand growth. By contrast, we see in the OECD, the advanced economies, and including the US, where we're seeing the policies put in place over the past few years really having an impact on oil demand, and we're seeing contraction setting in already starting next year. Now, looking at investment and see how it fits in the investment building, we are seeing an uptake in global upstream investment for oil and gas. This year, 2023, we're seeing now an increase of 11%. That is the highest, to the highest level since 2015, or about $530 billion US. And both this year and last year, we're seeing higher spending that was initially outlined by major oil and gas companies at the start of the year. So there's really an interest and an increase in the interest in investing in oil and gas to ensure that the markets are well supplied. So while a part of the increase in spending is obviously going to increase costs, we're seeing cost inflation across many of the major components for the upstream to the supply chain. We do see that these level investments, if they're maintained through the medium term, it should ensure that the markets are adequately supplied. So just to look at how it translates into supply, capacity building, we are seeing as for demand that on the supply side, in terms of production capacity, we do expect a slowdown in the capacity growth over the medium-term period. In 2022 and 2023, almost 2 million barrels a day of new supply was brought online. But this is set to slow in the coming years, as in particular the United States, growth in the United States is slowing based on the new investment strategies for the major players in the shale patch. So, but still, even if it's slowing, we do see it keeping up with demand growth that is slowing also, and we should see that spare capacity could be maintained around current levels. Now, just a few words on the U.S. growth. U.S. is a big, and has always, for the past decade, has played a major role in the oil markets. And now we're seeing, despite climate action, concerns of underinvestment and sharp slowdown in LTO The United States remains the biggest source of supply over the medium-term period, adding about 2.5 million barrels a day to global supply. The majority of it is crude oil from the tight oil, so about 1.7 million barrels, but we're also seeing a significant growth in natural gas liquids, which have implications for global markets for petrochemicals, rising LPG demand across the world, including in India. And we're seeing now exports of LPGs and ethane from the United States reaching all-time record highs. But the pace of expansion does slow. We're seeing that publicly listed companies that prioritizing shareholder returns, at least for now. So based on the current company strategies and where we're seeing things, we're seeing a slowdown in growth over the period. So this slowdown in growth from the United States would allow the Middle Eastern producers to increase their market share once again. We're at a low point now of around 30% market share in 2023 as OPEC plus countries led by the Middle Eastern producers, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Iraq, Kuwait, have cut back production to ensure that prices remain at a certain level. We're seeing that as the growth in the United States slows and other countries slows over the period and demand continues to increase, so will the market share of the Middle Eastern producers. And this is a trend that we expect to continue over the longer term. Now, a few words on the refining side. Of course, the COVID years 2020, 2022, we saw for the first time in at least 3 decades a net reduction in global refining capacity, and we saw more closures than additions for the first time. So we closed about 4 million barrels a day of refinery capacity just over these 2020-2022 period. But now, looking forward, most of the latest of this phase of shutdowns has been completed, and we're seeing new refinery capacity coming online, coming back. So about 6 million barrels a day of new refinery capacity expected by 2028. There are some more shutdowns on the cards from at least from advanced economies, and also some that have been announced in China. But in net, we see an increase of about 4.4 million barrels a day, which in our view should keep pace with the demand for refined products over this period. Now, of course, as has been the case in recent year, China leads the capacity building, adding 1.8 million barrels a day, followed by India and Middle East, where we see about 1.2 added. What's interesting to see is now that the capacity building is coming primarily in countries that are net product exporters, which will have implications for product trade going forward, and a growing share of products being traded and longer distances. So we are seeing, as capacity increases in the Middle East, a lot of the increased supply from the Middle East will go to meet domestic demand, which means that refiners in Asia would also have to draw in supplies from further afield. So in terms of crude trade, as a driver of growth, of future demand growth, east of Suez will fundamentally reshape crude balances. So the baseload supply now has been extended from the Middle East producers to include nearly all of Russian crude oil supplies. But going forward, additional supplies will be needed by China and other Asian refiners to meet the increased demand. But it is the Atlantic Basin where we see the increased supplies, not just from the United States, but from Brazil, from Guyana, from other producers. So we see over the period that the increase in supplies from the Middle East will go primarily to meet their regional demand, and we will see an increase of about 4 or 5 million barrels a day of crude oil that will flow from the Atlantic Basin to the Asian market by this period. So not only are we seeing a transformation on crude trade, we're also seeing big changes on the product side. the upheavals in global trade after Russia's invasion of Ukraine was unprecedented, and we will see a continued shift moving forward. In terms of diesel was one of the markets that were particularly tight in 2022 with the diesel cracks at record highs for a number of reasons. But over the medium term, we see that the market remaining relatively balanced. Regions that are in deficit, such as the Atlantic basins, excluding Russia, East Africa, and other Asia, the import requirement increased by about 1 million barrels, but we're seeing increased supplies from the exporting regions, which include the Middle East, India, and also in particular China. So one comment on China. So China now has the greatest share of installed capacity in the world and refining capacity. They overtook the United States last year. They're also practically the only country that is sitting on spare capacity in refining. And depending on how the domestic policies evolve moving forward, how how Beijing balances their climate targets, emission reductions, and their domestic industrial policy will have a major impact on the product markets. Just before finishing up, the other interesting parts when it comes to product markets going forward, we're seeing because gasoline demand is the product that is most significantly impacted by the transition, the new policies. We're seeing gasoline demand declining, and of course it would lead to surpluses. But we're seeing on the other side of the coin, the naphtha deficit will increase as petrochemical demand takes up an ever larger share. So the challenge for the refiners would be to balance their refinery outputs to be able to supply jet kerosene, diesel that continues to grow, and to find markets for the gasoline molecules, either via the refining or the petrochemical sector, or to adjust their if the economics allow it. So with that, I leave my presentation today. I'm happy to take any questions and on any subject. So thank you. Yes.
Sorry. So I just like to ask you, many of the trends, it looks like 2023 is back to pre-COVID demand. So the next 5 years, in terms of the insight, which places, which of the products has there been an impact of the energy transition or the climate transition? What are the differences as compared to pre-COVID, the growth rate, and the next 5 years, the projections?
Thank you. So we're definitely seeing the impact the most in advanced economies. It's where we have seen the most significant increase in clean energy investment and efficiency measures. But we're also seeing it's difficult at the current time to see what is the effect of the pandemic, what is still the rebound. Oil demand has been very strong, but we're not back to the normal trajectory. We're still in the recovering phase. And we're still looking to see how much of the behavioral changes and how much will stick, how much is permanent. So there's still a period where there are many moving pieces, but we're seeing gasoline demand coming down quite sharply. Electric vehicles, not just in Europe, but also increasingly in the United States, and in particular in China, where there's a big push. But we're also seeing the efficiency improvements for all sectors of energy. And this is something that we only clearly see now, because we couldn't see it during the COVID period when demand was weak, because we didn't travel so much, or we didn't do the same things. When you look at the aviation sector, for instance, if you look in terms of the number of flights and the number of seats and the number of kilometers, you see that you're back to pre-COVID level. If you get demand, is 7% lower. So the efficiency improvements, and this is from 2019 to 2023, it comes up as a big savings now that you wouldn't normally. You have much more gradual, but because we didn't travel, you didn't see. But also during the pandemic, we had quite a significant rotation of the air fleet. A lot of older planes were retired. We're traveling quite different. In terms of other areas where we see the energy transition really making impact, we are seeing areas where we're really pushing for rail. So change in modes of transport, high-speed rails from aviation. You're seeing change in behavior going into these areas. And there's a big push to improve energy efficiency in buildings and to have best appliances, best practices to reduce efficiency for the day-to-day, for the buildings, for industry. So it's quite global, and you see it in many different places. But I think in our view, we see it most impacting the gasoline demand